An extremely suffocating atmosphere hangs over the Gulf nations. Despite being long-standing strategic allies of the US, regional leaders are currently silently expressing their fury toward Washington. They believe that President Donald Trump's administration has pushed the entire region into a dangerous confrontation without adequately consulting those who will directly suffer the consequences. Amidst this rising tension, Trump has had to make continuous personal calls over the past week to reassure regional leaders, yet it seems trust is fracturing faster than anticipated. From Tehran's perspective, the conditions for ending hostilities are harsh. Mohsen Rezi, a powerful figure in Iranian politics, has asserted that stopping the war is entirely in their hands. The two prerequisites Tehran has set are: the US must pay full war reparations to Iran and must withdraw all military bases from the Persian Gulf. For Tehran, the presence of the US military is the single greatest obstacle to long-term security. A spokesperson for the Khatam al-Anbiya command added a chilling warning: if Iran's energy infrastructure is hit, every oil company in the region with American stakes or partnerships will be destroyed and turned to ash instantly. The reality on the battlefield is pushing Arab nations into an unprecedented dilemma. Since the conflict erupted, more than 2,000 Iranian missiles and drones have rained down on Gulf states. Shockingly, by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' own admission, only about 40% of their fire has been aimed at Israel, while the majority is directed at Arab neighbors. This is a clear psychological tactic from Tehran. They want to use firepower to force the Gulf states to distance themselves from Washington, while the US and Israel seemingly want to leverage these very attacks to pull Arab governments into an anti-Iran coalition. However, Gulf nations have no desire to be part of this war. Dubai billionaire Khalaf al-Habtoor candidly shared on social media that the region understands exactly who dragged them into this spiral of escalation without asking their allies. Some experts at the International Institute for Strategic Studies even suggest that Gulf countries are losing faith in the US, believing that Trump is prioritizing Israeli security over the lives and assets of his Arab partners next door. This concern is becoming all too real as interceptor missile stockpiles in Gulf countries dwindle to alarming levels. Although Washington has pledged to fast-track deliveries and even relocate parts of the Thihachayit defense system from South Korea to the Middle East, this pace is still considered far too slow compared to the intensity of Iran's strikes. The fact that the US is pulling hardware from a flashpoint like the Korean Peninsula to compensate for the Middle East reveals the desperation and strain on US global supply chains. Iran's previous direct threats are forcing Gulf nations to calculate very carefully. An official from the UAE reminded everyone that after the smoke clears, Iran remains a next-door neighbor they must live with forever. Regional experts also offer a bitter assessment. American forces will eventually pack their bags and leave, just as they did in Afghanistan and Iraq, but Iran will be there for eternity. Consequently, regional countries believe they must look out for themselves rather than betting everything on Washington's protection. Saudi Arabia, the undisputed heavyweight of the region, sits at the center of this storm. While Riyadh holds a geographic advantage with its Red Sea coastline, allowing for oil exports that bypass the volatile Strait of Hormuz, this route is far from a safe haven. The Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen have spent years perfecting their ability to strike maritime targets. At a moment's notice, they could paralyze global trade at the Bab al-Mandab choke point. If Saudi Arabia is drawn fully into the war, it faces the nightmare of a multi-front meat grinder, fighting a proxy war on its southern border with Yemen while enduring direct, high-precision missile barrages from Iran in the east. The Middle Eastern chessboard has never been more labyrinthine. America's allies are signaling that they are tired of being the passive shield for unilateral White House dictates. As Iran demonstrates its sophisticated reach and the US reveals the limits of its limitless protection, a heavy, cautious silence has fallen over the Gulf capitals. They are in a wait-and-see mode, watching to see if Trump's bravado will manifest into real, localized security or if they will be forced to bow to Tehran's terms to prevent their glass cities from being reduced to the very dust and ash the IRGC has promised. According to deep background sources within the Pentagon, the sheer scale of Operation Epic Fury has forced the US to burn through silver bullet munitions at a rate that would normally take a decade to accumulate. This isn't just a budgetary nightmare, it is a strategic crisis. Military planners are now sounding the alarm. If the US continues to deplete its high-end stocks in Iran, it will be left dangerously vulnerable should a great power conflict ignite with Russia in Europe or China in the Pacific. The US is winning the tactical battles but potentially losing its global deterrent edge. At the center of this logistical storm is the Tomahawk cruise missile, the workhorse of American power projection. Each of these precision-guided missiles costs roughly $3.6 million, and the current burn rate is nothing short of mammoth. To understand the gravity of the situation, consider that over the past 5 years combined, the US military only procured 322 new Tomahawks. In just the first 2 weeks of this conflict, they have fired hundreds more than that. The replenishment capacity of defense giants like RTX, formerly Raytheon, is being pushed to its absolute breaking point. Navy commanders are privately admitting that the missile gap created by this war will haunt American naval readiness for the next decade. While the US is forced to expend multi-million-dollar Patriot and THAAD interceptors, Iran is playing a low-cost, high-impact game. Senator Mark Kelly has been vocal about this disastrous economic equation. Tehran can churn out Shahed suicide drones for the price of a mid-sized sedan, roughly $30,000. Forcing a $3 million missile to shoot down a $30,000 drone is a path to financial ruin. This explains why the Pentagon is preparing an emergency $50 billion war chest request for Congress, on top of the $11 billion already vaporized in the opening 6 days of the campaign. This financial hemorrhage is now bleeding back into the domestic American political landscape. As the midterm elections loom, the kitchen table issues are taking center stage. With global oil benchmarks crossing $100 per barrel, American families are seeing the war tax every time they fill up their tanks. Iranian Foreign Minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi has weaponized this economic pain, taunting the American public by claiming that the vanity war in Washington is directly cannibalizing their pension funds and driving up mortgage rates. It is a potent form of political subversion that is finding fertile ground in a polarized America. The conflict has now entered a dark phase where civilian infrastructure is no longer off limits. The strike on the Keshem Island desalination plant in Iran was a turning point, triggering a direct eye-for-an-eye retaliation against Bahrain's water facilities. In a region where water is more precious than oil, targeting desalination plants is an existential threat. These water wars have sent a wave of panic through the Gulf. Despite frantic denials from Abu Dhabi regarding their involvement, the fear of being dragged in by association is at an all-time high. The global energy shock is now being felt in every corner of the world. With 20% of the world's oil supply effectively frozen in the Strait of Hormuz, we are witnessing the most violent energy disruption in modern history. The crisis worsened when Qatar Energy was forced to suspend LNG shipments following nearby strikes, causing European natural gas prices to spike by a terrifying 50%. Economists are now warning of a global recession red zone if oil hits $150 per barrel, a milestone that seems closer every day. Despite the ironclad confidence projected by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, the math doesn't add up. Hegseth claims the US can sustain this campaign indefinitely, but factory floor realities and empty silos suggest otherwise. Even the Arab billionaires who once funneled trillions into the American economy are pulling back, realizing that the fire of war is beginning to singe their own portfolios. Operation Epic Fury, once envisioned as a swift, surgical decapitation of the Iranian threat, has morphed into a grinding, multi-billion-dollar war of attrition. In this high-stakes poker game, the house is losing its chips, and the players are starting to realize that no one, not even the most powerful military on Earth, has a path to absolute victory. Iran, however, is very clear about its objectives and firepower. The Revolutionary Guard admitted that only about 40% of Tehran's fire is directed at Israel. The remainder, thousands of missiles and drones, is aimed at neighboring Arab nations. This move is considered a pressure strategy. Tehran wants to turn the Gulf into a pain point to force regional nations to push back against Washington. President Donald Trump once stated on television that Iran's attacks on US partners were a big surprise, while noting it would make Gulf countries want to join the campaign against Tehran. These statements have silently fueled resentment among the Arab elite. Gulf leadership understands they are bearing the direct brunt of a conflict they did not initiate.